Service information was a regular program in the early days of color television in the United Kingdom that gave out engineering information for the radio and television trade. These announcements were made by the BBC continuity announcers of the time and were read over in vision captions. The program was broadcast on BBC Two 3 times a day, 10 o'clock a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 2:30 p.m. each weekday from October 23, 1967 to 1975, then once a day at 10:30 a.m. from 1975 until the final broadcast on December 23, 1982. The IBA, and its predecessor, the ITA, had a similar program called Engineering Announcements. In the days of early color television in Great Britain, the BBC Two daytime periods were filled with the color test card and trade test color films to help viewers and dealers to test and tune in their television receivers. Service information bulletins would be preceded with a clock for 2 minutes and a catchy theme which was called Walk and Talk, played by the Sid Dale Orchestra, later replaced in 1978 with Swirly by Roger Limb. The clock was electronically recolored in a variety of color schemes in order to differentiate it from the clock used for BBC Two's main presentation. The bulletin would then start with information regarding current transmitters and relays being either on reduced power or off air. This would then be followed with news of brand new transmitters and relays and when they were due to come on air. Details of trade shows or exhibitions next, and anything else related to the technical development of color television at the time. Then there would be a recap of the day's transmitter news followed by a caption showing the address of the BBC Engineering Information Department. The bulletin would then end with a rundown of the trade test color films being shown on that particular day. And now we are returning to the color test card and music until play school at 11 o'clock would be a familiar closing phrase. Service information bulletins generally lasted an average of 2 or 3 minutes, but on Wednesday, August 25, 1971, the longest service information bulletin known was aired, which ran for 11 minutes. A Monday to Friday tuning information bulletin was added to BBC Two in the heyday of color, coming to BBC One and ITV from November 10, 1969 to December 31, 1970 at 6:15 p.m. with an extra transmission for a 2-week period from November 17, 1969 until November 28, 1969, broadcast at 4:30 p.m., Mondays to Fridays. The service information spots were often looked at by the BBC as a training ground for their new continuity announcers. Here they could deliver concise and informative speech for a few minutes at a time and broadcast relatively safely to a smaller than usual viewing audience. Amongst the continuity announcers who could be heard during this period were David Allen, Michael Burley, Peter Bovar, John Brabham, John Brand, Peter Brook, Andy Cartledge, Malcolm Ainan, Mike Gamble, John Glover, Martin King, John Leeson, Keith Martin, Roger Maud, Tim Nichols, Mel Oxley, Clive Roslin, John Russ Barnard, Clenshaw, Peter Shoesmith, Ian Disdains, Richard Straker, John Trevor, Colin Ward-Lewis and Robin Whiting. Here's a sample transcript of a 10 o'clock service information bulletin from Friday, August 24, 1973, which includes the announcement concerning the last day of trade test color films being shown. It's 10 o'clock and a very good morning to you from BBC Television. It's time for service information for the television trade. First, transmitter information concerning Stockland Hill and Beacon Hill. BBC One UHF Stockland Hill has been on reduced power since 9 o'clock and will continue so for some time this morning. BBC Two Beacon Hill has also been on reduced power since 9 o'clock, remaining so for some time today. I'll just repeat those. BBC One UHF Stockland Hill has been on reduced power since 9 o'clock and will continue so for some time this morning, and BBC Two Beacon Hill has also been on reduced power since 9 o'clock, remaining so for some time today. The BBC Wales 625 line colour television service from Priestley Relay Station in Pembrokeshire has now opened. The BBC Two service opens tomorrow. Both channels are subject to engineering tests until the full programme service begins on September 1st. Priestley will serve about 89,000 people, mostly in Pembrokeshire but including some in the western parts of Cardiganshire and Carmarthenshire. Group B aerials with horizontal rods are required for receiving the 625 line transmissions from Priestley, and they should be directed towards the site of the station, which is about 9 miles south of Cardigan. Group B aerials are suitable for both BBC channels, 46 that's BBC Wales and 40 for BBC Two, as well as the other 2 channels assigned to Priestley, 43 for ITV and 50. They should be carefully positioned for optimum reception on the different channels. Following successful test transmissions, The full stereo program service will be broadcast from the BBC's Holme Moss and Belmont transmitting stations starting tomorrow. Relay stations at Scarborough, Sheffield, Wensleydale, and Windermere will also radiate the stereo programs. These 6 stations serve most of Lancashire, Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, and parts of adjacent counties, and they will bring stereo on Radio 1 when that's transmitted on VHF, Radio 2 and Radio 4 to more than 11.5 million listeners in the north. Radio 3 has been transmitted in stereo from Holme Moss for several years, but from now on it will use the new pulse code modulation distribution system along with the other programs, giving a consequent improvement in technical quality. This improvement should also be noticeable to listeners with monophonic equipment. At some receiving locations near the limit of the service areas of the transmitting stations concerned, the change from monophonic to stereophonic reception may introduce additional background noise, and this can often be reduced by using a more efficient aerial system, and listeners in these circumstances should seek the advice of their local radio dealer. Monophonic reception of stereophonic transmissions is not affected in this way. Well, today is the last day of the trade test color films, which have been transmitted regularly by BBC Television since 1954. But now that there are color programs shown on one channel or the other for most of the day, the time available for transmission of the test card has been considerably reduced, and the need for high-quality moving pictures during trade tests has diminished. So after consultation with representatives of the television trade, it's been decided that from next week available time on BBC Two will mainly be filled by the test card together with service information announcements, and the service information in the afternoons will be at 4:30 instead of 2:30 but will remain at 10 o'clock and 11:30 in the mornings. Full details of the new schedule will shortly be published as an information sheet. Well, today there's more service information at 11:30 and at 2:30 this afternoon. And those color films, well, the color films being shown in today's trade test transmissions are at 11:35 Journey into the Weald of Kent, at 12:10 Cantagallo, at 2 o'clock North Sea Quest, at 2:35 Giuseppina, and the last trade test color film at 3:30, Coupe di Alpes. At 4:30 instead of the usual trade test color film, BBC Two opens up with coverage of the second day's play in the third test at Lord's. Well, now the color test card and music are with us until our first scheduled program of the day, Play School, at 11 o'clock. Note that in fact Coupe de Alpes, which had been revived as a finale having not been shown since 1968, was not shown because cricket coverage began earlier than scheduled, and Giuseppina became the last trade test color film ever shown.